Today we're going to talk about us. Okay.
Part of their campaign for when they were selling cars. Ask the man who owns a Packard was part of their slogan.
What happened was that in Packard, the Packard brothers in Warren, Ohio, started the Ohio Motor Car Company in 1899. And this is truly early motoring, okay? It wasn't anything like a car. It was more like a motorized four-wheel bicycle. You know, that's why they call them horseless carriages, right? Okay. Early advertising is the best in the last century was best by word of mouth. And people would write to the Packard brothers and say, don't you have a sales brochure? No, we're busy building the first cars. My brother and I are building the first Packard automobiles. And so finally the boss told the secretary, just tell him, ask the man who owns one. And that is the iconic slogan, one of the longest live slogans in automotive history for selling cars. And in the 50s, they turned it around when they were trying to get a larger feminine market. Ask the woman who owns one. I mean, we got plenty of stories to tell here. That's why you need to visit us on a regular basis. Take a tour. The docents will help you out, and we can tell all kinds. We could be here till midnight. Like on the cruises in the Caribbean, where they serve lunch, dinner, pizza at 11, and like that. We could be here all day long if we want to. But if you do have questions, interrupt me. If you have very specific questions, talk to me after the program is over. Now, Deborah, do we get a chance to go into the tank test engineering building today?
Okay, looks like Joe's going to be available around 2-ish.
Okay, so we can have more questions out there. Even better. All good on ask the man who owns one? Okay. This is our logo, and this is from an image on opening day when they had a grand opening party on Flag Day of 1928. The visiting folks, the executives from other automobile companies, they all get a little swag bag, just like you go to a grand opening of a building or someplace. They did the same, and this is an image for grand opening day when, do you remember ink pens where you actually had to put the ink in the pen? This was a blotter. So that, among other things, you got a blotter that had a picture of your day at the Packard Proving Grounds when it was opened in 1928. Here's a little bit about us. The Packard Motor Car Foundation was founded in 1997. We're a 501c3. The site was originally almost a square mile from 22 to 23 Mound to Van Dyke, almost 600 acres. We acquired 14 acres, we being the Packard Motor Car Foundation, acquired 14 acres from the Ford Motor Land Development Company, because after Packard left Detroit in June of 1956. Eventually the land was acquired by Ford, and we have a picture on a back wall over there of what was then, they moved it over there, of what was a Packard plant for building engines that Packard had erected in the early 1950s. That became, this property was taken over by Ford, their Utica trim plant, and they kept on expanding that site. And I'll show you later some images of how that expansion took place over a number of decades. We now own a total of 17 acres because we acquired another 3 acres in 2016, and there's one more acre over in the corner that we'd like to get a hold of. And that guy wants 2-3 times what its fair market value is. But Someday we'll have a meeting of the minds. We've won a number of awards. In order to have an ethically operated 501c3, we want to take the best practices of a lot of institutions. American Association of State and Local Histories, the American Alliance of Museums. We're registered as a gold transparent, financially transparent 501c3 by Candid. Less than 1% of all nonprofits reach that level. So we want to operate ethically, and we want to operate much like all the other automobile museums, and we belong to the National Association of Automobile Museums. Great organization, have an annual conference, and I was in LA with my wife first part of the month for a 5-day conference, 2 days of classes, best practices on how to operate ethically a museum, and then tours. And lucky for us, they surprised us and took us to Jay Leno's garage. So I still have a smile on my face from that visit. We got to get to the next slide. A couple of important things. We're the only museum in the world showcasing the company's history on their proving grounds. And in the USA, we're only one of 3 museums that are operating on property owned by the manufacturer. So we've got double duty to do, because not only are we preserving the history of the company, but we're preserving all of the history that occurred at that site. And frankly, manufacturing plants are really great, but proving grounds, to me, we get to tell a much bigger, much richer story, and we'll be talking about some of those items today. A couple of fast facts we have. We have a library that we're digitizing, 25,000 photographs. We've run through about 13,000 in the last 4 years. The scanning of those documents are easy to do relative to what are you looking at? It's called metadata. Who's in that photograph? Why are they there? What vehicles behind them? Where are they? Are at the Detroit Packard manufacturing plant? Are they here? Some site on the West Coast? That is what takes a lot of time to have that metadata collected. So we're using subject matter experts that are good friends of ours, and we share that information with them, and we're going to have this digital library put up where you can access images of not exactly your car, but your car model in some point in time in Packard history. We also have 40,000 blueprints, and we are selling copies of those to folks who have a part that they need that is in LA, no longer available. Worst thing you want to hear when you're restoring a car is in LA, because that means more cheddar. So we have blueprints. You can take and buy a blueprint from us. It's to scale. You can take it to your local tool and die shop, and they'll make you a copy of that part to the best of their ability, or maybe even make it better. What was cast iron now can be made in stainless. What was soft items now can be 3D printed. So we're trying to help preserve the cars that are on the road too, not just here on our property. And we have a number of personal libraries from Packard executives, and gives us a lot of detail of the patents that they applied for and won. And what I'm moving on to now here is the Packard plant at 1580 East Grand Boulevard in relative downtown Detroit. The plant was started in 1903. The Packard brothers were approached by a group of financiers from Detroit, Henry B. Joy and others. The folks were the princes of Griswold Street, Detroit's version of Wall Street. And they brought the company to Detroit and told the brothers, you got to be here. This is where all the suppliers are. Warren, Ohio, you're in a backwater country. You got to come to Detroit. And they did. They stayed on the board for a number of years and then gradually moved on with other things in their life. And the Packard brothers were some very astute businessmen, but they have a deep and rich history. But it's really so rich, it takes longer to tell. They had other businesses besides the Packard Automobile Company. Some other Packard firsts. There's a long list here, but maybe you'll see that Packard was the first to have a steering wheel in a car. How about four-wheel brakes? You like to stop your car when you come to a red light or somebody pulls in front of you? Four-wheel brakes work better than two. How about having a radio in a car? Packard was the first in 1934 to have a car pre-wired to accept an optional radio in the dashboard of the car. And then there's one thing on there. I'm going to ask you guys, raise your hands if you don't have air conditioning in your car. Does anybody know of a car sold today that comes without air conditioning?
I had one.
You had one.
I did.
And what was that?
Chevy Sprint.
What year?
The Chevy Sprint was back in the late 80s.
Oh, olden times. 40 years ago. 40 years ago. So I know, I get it too. So Packard in 1939, in the fall of 39, was introducing the 1940 line of cars. And one of the optional options you could buy for your car was air conditioning. Cost a whopping $275 more. But Packard was the first to have air conditioning in a car because not only are they known for their quality, but they want the folks that are buying the car are the wealthy. These were luxury cars. They had the best engines. They had the best driveline. Packard had won a number of awards for their durability, but also for their luxury cars because they're selling to the wealthiest clientele. Not only was Packard building engines for cars, but they were also building engines for airplanes, and that started in World War I, continued on between the wars when Packard developed the world's first diesel engine for aircraft. And then also in World War II, they built almost 60,000 Rolls-Royce designed Merlin engines that fit in most of England's Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Lancaster bombers. And we were building them here because in England, they were only 25 miles away from the shores of occupied France and getting bombed routinely. So their factories had a very difficult time building the engines and keeping their aircraft in the air. And it wasn't working, so they came to Detroit in 1939 to find out who could build those engines. Packard said, yes, we can do that. So that kept the air dome secure over England, and it gave us some of the fastest fighter airplanes in the world to protect the bombers hitting the Axis powers. Packard also built a lot of marine engines. If you take the tour afterwards, there's a boat back there owned by Garwood. 4 V12 Packard engines, developing 2,000 horsepower apiece, pushed that boat to a world's record in 1931 as the first boat to do 125 miles an hour. Packard's always building things for the cause, and during the Arsenal of Democracy period during World War II, they built minesweeper engines, and they also built the engines going into torpedo boats. So, now that Packard's building cars, where do you test them? That little red hexagon, which is Packard's symbol, is where the plant is. You see where Belle Isle is? Just make the turn, right-hand turn off of East Grand Boulevard, head to Belle Isle, and they were testing cars on Belle Isle. But they could also have a little test track you see at the at the very top of the image, there's a little test track, and there's a black and white image, and here that is, that you can see what was passing for a proving grounds in the early 20s. But Henry B. Joy, back in 1915, acquired 640 acres, a square mile, and that turned out to be Selfridge Air Force Base. Henry B. Joy came to the board and said, guess what, we're going to have a real proving grounds to scientifically test the quality of our cars and make them better for each generation of car. And the board told him, Henry, you're crazy. We've got Belle Isle. We've got other places. We've got the we've got the horse racing track on Jefferson near Connor. We can go there. He put up with that, sold the property, and as Deborah mentioned earlier, it became Selfridge Air Force Base during World War I. 1924, though, GM opens up their test track in Milford, and now the executives on the board realize we're late to the game. So they came out here to what was then called Utica, Michigan, bought nearly a square mile, almost, like I said, almost 600 acres, and built the proving grounds. Now at the bottom of the image, at 6 o'clock, you see the road that's on the horizon. Let me step around here. Van Dyke, Mount, Shelby Road, 23 and 22. You can see there's other stuff going on here. And what's going on is a high-speed test track. 12, and well, later it was 15, but they started out with 12 miles of badland roads, and those are all the roads that are up in the upper left-hand corners, you see it. Steep hills, water baths, sand pits, clay pits, and the Packards were tested on these steep hills, sand pits, rough roads, to build quality into the car. All of the buildings on our site were designed by Albert Kahn and Associates, except for two. The building next door was built in 1942. And how many of you have been, raise your hand if you've been to Meadowbrook Hall. Lovely building, isn't it? Do you know who designed it? What? Oh no, otherwise he would have been part of the two. His name is William Capp. And during World War II, Packard leased the property to the government to test tanks here. What's it, 11 and a half mile in Van Dyke? Somebody say the Chrysler tank plant, right? So tanks during the war were driven up Van Dyke to be tested on the same steep hills, water baths, clay pits as the Packards were tested. First building on the site, 1928, is the Lodge Garage. This is what it looked like in 1928. And you can see that neither the building we're in or the buildings behind us have been erected. It's basically the test track and the garage, and the lodge here is where the family of Charles Vincent, his wife Lucille, and 3 daughters lived. And surprisingly, and lucky for us, to see the little baby girl in between mom and her sisters. She was 3 years old in this picture, and she still lives today. And the last time we saw her here was 2018, and I saw her a year ago. She's living in Tucson, Arizona, and Bobby keeps us straight on paint colors of their house because they lived here on site. There were garages on the first level, and on the second level were what I would call bed and breakfast rooms for engineers that are watching their tests go on 24/7 on proving grounds, either the high-speed track or the badland roads. I lost my cursor. There we go. We're sitting in what's the repair garage. This is where a car typically does. This is a picture from 29. It was not here for opening day, but it was erected a year later. And this is where a car does either 10,000 miles in 10 days or 25,000 miles in 25 days. So they're running these cars 24/7 over these badland roads, as I was mentioning. And these roads were actually laid out by Charles Vincent. He drove a car, and he wanted a lot of dirt road driving because there weren't a lot of paved roads, even as late as the late 20s. And his wife, Lucille, drove the same pattern day in, day out until there was a path worn in the dirt, and those are the roads that they tested the cars on. Lucille must have been a sport. The steep hills, the water baths, sand pits. Those images are all from a brochure that was published in 1930. And also in 1930, Packard was building their 12-cylinder engines, putting them in their most luxurious cars. And every one was driven here for 250 miles, nicely broken in. You got your document testifying that they survived the test. The car was detailed, and the keys were wax stamped onto your passport that this car had survived and been tested at the Packard Proving Grounds. I mentioned earlier I was in California, and we had, as I said, classes and tours. And at one of the tours, one of the other museums we were visiting, I talked to their curator and I asked him if there were 312s in the collection, all from the 30s era. Does it still have the sticker on the back of the glove box? And he looked at me like, what? Yeah, every car tested had the sticker put on. So we looked inside all three cars, and you could see where the felt flocking was, where the sticker was for two of the cars, but third car had that sticker on that had been tested here for 250 miles. Some restores, when cars get restored, the restorers today are getting much more finicky about authenticity. Some restorers back in the 80s, it was, let's just put a paint job on it. So the quality of restorations, in my personal opinion, are using better materials, better metallurgy, better paints when they restore the automobiles. Opening day. Opening day, you want to put on a show, right? So Packard has a grand opening party. There's party favors, there's going to be lunch, and you've got to have a show. Albert Kahn had designed what he thought was the perfect test track so that cars could be run continuously and safely, because the job was put the miles on as soon as you can, because the more miles you put on, the faster that test was over. So Packard built the test track under Kahn's design, and grand opening day was, I said before, June 14th, and that's only 3 weeks after the Indianapolis Motors, the greatest spectacle in motor racing, Indianapolis 500. So, who do you invite? You invite the two fastest guys that set the hottest laps at Indy. One guy was named Leon DeRay. He set a record at Indy of 122 miles an hour. And they invited Leon and his racing partner, Norm Batten, to come on out to see what they could do. And they told him, you know, we're so fresh at this, we're just completing stuff. And you can see in this one image, the guardrails, the wire guardrails are laying on the ground, and they told Leon, be careful out there, have fun, but be careful out there. And he said, don't worry, I'm not going to use your guardrails. And he blistered the track at 148 miles an hour. That speed wasn't duplicated at Indy until 1962. That's how well designed that track was. Never had a fatality. And the drivers used to, when they would bring visiting dignitaries out here, the drivers would routinely take their hands off the wheel high up on the bank of the track at over 100 miles an hour and ask somebody for, want a glass of water? You want a drink? Can I light your cigar back there, sir? But that was routine. That's how safe the track was. And this is Leon DeRay pulling in after that high-speed run at 148 miles an hour. We were lucky enough that for our 90th anniversary, we borrowed that car. It still exists. It's in the Indianapolis Motor Museum. And if you haven't been there and you like cars, you're missing it. They just completed a $65 million renovation. First week of April, reopened up after being closed for almost 2 years. And I was in it during construction, and I'm going to tell you, they're going to have a spectacular museum there. Anyway, this is Leon DeRay in number 4, pulling in and coming back to that building over there where it was prepared for racing on June 14th, 1928. Next building is the Test Tank Center. This is a building that was erected when Chrysler was testing the tanks here. This building, you could not tear down a tank like you could a Packard. So, William Capp for Chrysler and the federal government built the new tank test center where they could take the tanks that were tested and tear them down, every nut and bolt, to make sure they're putting out a high quality product to go to war. And then they were shipped off on a railroad spur and off to war. This is what it looks like today. I'm sorry, you're going to actually see the building. This is a presentation I give when I'm traveling around. And the other building that was not of Albert Kahn design was an aircraft hangar. And people are thinking, what's so important to this? Well, I'm going to tell you in a few minutes some of the records that were set at that aircraft hangar. It was in the infield of the high-speed test track, and we picked it up and we moved it to our site. And I think it was about 2002, 2003. And here we have it today. But it's really important to us because this is where the first flight of a diesel-powered airplane occurred in September of 1929. This is quite special because these were engines that were extremely fuel efficient, and it had one other really nifty thing that I'm going to tell you about. World's first happened here. Not only the flying of the plane, but in 1929, it was the first time you could talk to a pilot in flight. Now that seems pretty mundane because you get on any airline today and the first thing you hear is, thanks for flying Delta. We know you can pick any airline you want. And you hear half the conversation of the pilots as they're taking off or landing. But in 1929, you couldn't talk to a pilot in flight. Who here has a diesel-powered vehicle? Anybody? Nobody? Anybody know the difference between a diesel engine and a gasoline-fueled engine? You're shaking your head. Tell the story.
Our milk runs on gasoline, one runs on diesel fuel.
That's true, but diesel fuel is self-igniting. It doesn't need spark plugs. The problem with a gas engine in the early 20s, late 20s, was that those spark plug wires, the magneto and distributor, are making so much static electricity that the airplane, the front of the airplane, is basically a static electric ball. And the weak radio signal of talking could not penetrate that static ball. Well, now you put a diesel aircraft engine on a plane, that static ball goes away. So in the room, I told you there were bed and breakfast rooms on the second floor of the Lodge building. They also had a little gathering room, fireplace, maybe they had cigars after a long day, whatever. That was commandeered by Charles Vincent. Here he is, pictured with his ham radio operator set. And they told the government about it. We can talk to a plane in flight. And they said, you're kidding. And the Department of Commerce came here and watched the plane being flown in larger and larger circles, radio circles, and they're still talking to the guy in flight. Because before that, the only way you could hear through that static ball was the sharp dit-da of Morse code. That little spark you see, you know. So imagine you're flying around. What's weather Poughkeepsie? And there's, you get the answer back. Was that 40 knots or 4 knots of wind? Oh, okay. So you can imagine how important this was in aviation history. And I'm not stopping yet. I'm going to tell you one more thing that happened. 1931, here's a Belanca powered by a Packard diesel 980 engine. DR980 diesel radial, 980 cubic inches, excuse me. What's the longest flight? Anybody have flown to Japan? How many hours were you in the air? Yeah, I know, I said the same thing. It was 14 for me. And anybody else gone to Australia? It's a little longer. Yeah, and how long to Australia?
17.
Yeah, right? So, did that plane refuel? No, you flew direct, right? So now in the 1931, people want to fly direct just like you want to fly direct today. So Packard had this diesel engine on a Belanca airplane, 2 pilots, Fred Brossi and Walter Lees, and they set a new distance record, time aloft record without refueling. Now, if you're going to set a record, you better be prepared. So here's a picture of them at the beach near Jacksonville Beach, Florida, getting ready to load those tins of diesel fuel into the airplane. And with those tins of fuel, give me a guess. Get crazy. What's the longest time you think that plane flew in the air in 1931? It's a little bigger than a Cessna 172. Anybody want to guess? 13. No. We want to set a world's record. No. Close. 84 and a half hours. This is the kind of engineering that Packard gets into, and this wasn't a government contract to build this engine. They just thought they could do it. First time it happened, it flew, was right here out of Utica, Michigan, and the first time they talked to a pilot in air was in the second floor of the building next door. This is why it's important to us, because it's an important story of Packard not only being a car builder, but a master motor builder. All these achievements by the diesel engine earned Packard the Collier Award in 1931. And here are the 2 pilots next to the plane. And the Collier Award for Aviation is given out. It's now the trophy that's there in front of Lee and Bossy is the original one. It's now at the Smithsonian. If you want to take the time today, we have the manufacturer's trophy in our collection in the building next door. We can show that to you. Going through time, what other records have been set here? 1935, Packard sets a record for a car run for 7.5 days. I told you, typical test was 10,000 miles in 10 days. Well, this car ran 15,000 miles plus in 7 days. Average speed was 87.5 miles an hour. This is when Packard introduced their 1935 and 36 models, which were called the Junior Series, and they were more of a production car, while they also had a separate line called the Senior Series, which was more of a hand-built car, much like Rolls-Royce. What did we do during the Arsenal of Democracy? Number 1, I'm talking about Packard Motor Car Foundation, Packard Motor Car Company, is we turned the track over for tank testing here on the property. Number 2, built those Merlin aircraft engines. And by working with Rolls-Royce together, when Rolls-Royce first came to Detroit, they said, Packard told them, we can't build it the way you do it. You're still building engines and cars by hand and hand fitting them. And they said, that's because you can't hold the tolerances? No, our cars have tighter tolerances than your aircraft engines. So in 1939, that Merlin engine put out 1,050 horsepower. And by the end of the war, through continuous improvement, Packard got that engine up to 2,280 horses. Who's seen Maverick? He and Goose are on the flight line. We got the need for speed. You're a pilot. You have more horsepower. You have more speed. You have a better chance of living. Then the PT boat. Also, the PT boat engines, we have a model in our collection. We have a PT boat engine in our collection. These are large V12 supercharged engines, burning aviation gas, 1,500 horsepower to 1,800 horsepower, and 3 of them are in each 81-foot long plywood boat. This is the kind of stuff Packard is doing for the arsenal of democracy. After the war is over, I told you earlier, Packard Brothers started the Ohio Automobile Company in 1899. 1949 rolls around and it's the 50th anniversary of Packard. And this image that you see is from the cover of Life magazine in 1949. Packard had a special anniversary golden car. You could order the car and you're going to pick it up in Detroit. Actually here. You came to town with your dealer, you got a tour of the factory, how the car was built, and your car was waiting out here on the grounds of the Packard Proving Grounds, all lined up, ready for you to drive it back to Keokuk, Iowa, or wherever. It was a big deal. The war is over, it's happy days, cars are getting colorful, people are enjoying life again. One of the final records that was set here was in 1954. Maybe I should have prefaced it earlier. Packard left Detroit in 1956. So by 1954, Packard is on a eventual slide out of business. They had merged with Studebaker in 1954, but they had developed their first V8 engine. Those engines were being assembled at the far corner of the property up near Mound and 23, but they wanted to prove how good they were to the public. Packard had loved their straight 8 engines, but time was passing them by, and they came out with the world's most powerful V8 engine for 1955, and during that time they ran it 25,000 miles. Instead of doing it in 25 days, they did it in 10 days at an average speed of 105 miles an hour. Set another world's record and endurance record. And that's all due to not only the good drivers Packard had, but the test track that Kahn had designed. Any questions so far? Yes?
On that 25,000-mile endurance run in 54, I saw a film of it on YouTube.
Yes.
Promotional film that Packard put out.
Right.
I read somewhere along the line that they changed the engine in that.
No, sir. They did make changes, but not the engine. I wish I had the slide here. I have slides from both the 36 endurance run, well, actually 39, they're driving a 36 car in it. This is the countryside. There's deer, there's pheasants, everything is around this site in the 30s and the 50s. These cars were in the middle of the night smashing into birds, pheasants. And I have pictures of both, like I say, 35 and 54, where pheasants are embedded in the radiators. They'd have to stop to take the pheasants out so the car could stay cool. Well, one made it through the windshield of a car in 54. And so they spread some plexiglass and what was the equivalent of duct tape in those days over that hole in the car so they could keep pushing that thing. That's the only thing. And the tires. If you remember, when you guys first started driving, how long did a set of tires last in your car? If you got 10,000 miles, that was a big deal, right? And tires today, adjusted for inflation, are actually cheaper than they were when I got out of high school. And you're driving on safe, steel-belted radial tires, and if you don't get 40,000 miles out of the set of tires, you're unhappy. I mean, cars were changing, getting flats and blowouts all the time. No, that engine and frame and car stayed together. I know the YouTube video that you referenced, and they pushed around, well, I shouldn't use the term pushed, on promotional tours. They did have the same model car painted with the name tags on it, but the real car had a giant bungee cord and hood latch to make sure that the hood didn't fly up and the damage from all the pheasants. But other than that, the promotional cars they sent around the country were identical models, the same car that was tested. That help you out? Okay. What's happened over time? This is an aerial image from 1949. Oh, yes, ma'am.
How much was that golden Packard? And are there any in
They are around. We don't own one. I'd love to own one. I can tell you the golden Packards in general, the paint job was part of a promotion, so I don't even know if they charge extra for the paint. Because, you know, it's the 50th year you're having a party, just give the customer what he wants. Packards in the 50s and 40s were probably 4 times more costly than a Ford or a Chevrolet. I don't know the dollar number, but an inflation factor really doesn't speak to, relative to the time, how much a Packard cost. In the teens and 20s, a Packard would probably be 5 to 7 times the cost of a Ford or a Chevrolet. A Model T, easily 10 times. And by the 1954 in that time frame, 2 to 3 times more expensive than a Ford or a Chevrolet. So you had to want one. You know, what does a Chevrolet go for today? Yeah, I see you laughing. My wife was showing me a Lincoln Navigator. It was in the paper here, tested by the Detroit News or whatever, $105,000. When I was in high school, if you told somebody, hey, I'm going to be driving a long truck and it's going to cost me $105,000, they'd still be laughing. So it's kind of relative. Okay, let's go through time. This is what the place looks like in 1949. You can, I'm going to step around here. The V8 engine blade hasn't been built. The Badland roads have expanded. It's 1949, and when this aerial photograph was taken, during the 2 weeks that the driveway occurred, I was lucky enough to find an image where all the cars are parked, ready for their owners to come to Detroit to pick up their cars. The steep hills, the water vats, sand pits, clay pits. That's 1949. And the aircraft hangar, and you can still see the remnants of where the tanks are driving around, putting mileage on them, but not up on the high-speed track. Okay. We're going to see a little change through time now. 1956. You can see up in the upper corner near Shelby in 23, Packard has built this. It originally was a jet engine plant because during the Korean War, Packard was building jet engines under a license for the first jet aircraft that were in use in the Korean War. After the Korean War was over, Packard took the plant, Packard got that back and made that the engine plant where they built the V8s. 1967. Ford has been living in the property for about 10 years now, and they're expanding that, what they call the Utica trim plant, to take over more and more coming south towards 22 Mile Road and expanding their trim plant. Our side of the property where you'd see the boulevard coming in, they were leaving this place alone. They did use the offices. They had only used the test track to authenticate emissions control for the 64 Falcon cars that were coming out. And other than that, they really didn't use the test track. They just used it for storage space. Here we are in 1999. This is about the time we, being the Packard Motor Car Foundation, has an interest in acquiring some land from Ford because they're getting ready to sell this property to the U.S. government so that this could be a postal mail facility and sorting area. Neighbors around here did not want that to happen. We were able to move in and say, hey, since that's not going to happen, what would it take? And we acquired 14 acres from Ford. They gave us the front 7 acres, this building and forward, and then we had to buy another 7 acres that direction. But they were very good, gave us a fair price about it, and the front 7 acres were free. We just had to prove to them that we could clean up the site enough. And I'll show you some pictures of that in a second. Here's what it looks like just 10 years ago, 11 years ago. The subdivision has been built. There's more retail and shopping development along Van Dyke. And finally, we have, from last year, the Amazon Fulfillment Center and the other buildings that are on the north side of the property. Here's how we got it. It was overgrown with trees. I mean, this building was overgrown. The lodge building was nothing but trees. And for the first couple of years, it was just like we were a group of lumberjacks. We had a lot of volunteers helping us out. And now here's what it looks like today. The entrance to this building, the door you walk through, this is what it looked like. Those trees had their roots under the foundation of the building. This is what it looked like when you walked in today. Here's the tank test building. They're having a party during the war because Chrysler had just won an E for Excellence award for constructing high-quality tanks that went off to war. Mostly they were Sherman M4s. This is what the building looks like now. We finished a restoration project on the inside, and in the foreground is Garwood's 4-engined Miss America 10. We call her Max, because Roman numeral X, so Miss America 10. That's the boat that set the record. Last year we completed about $200,000 worth of repairs to the building, including, and if you have a chance, and I would recommend it, go see the front doors are now reassembled. The front doors of the Packard plant are now reassembled on our site. We've got a lot of projects to do forthcoming. We want to add some air conditioning and basic heat to this building is heated, so is the lodge. We want to heat the building, the tank test center, and air condition that. So we've got a lot of money we have to raise in order to get that kind of work done. We're also going to restore the garage doors on the lower half of the lodge building. It was done 25 years ago and it needs it now. We've got some special events coming up. May 27, 29. we have a special showing of only V12 Packards from the 1930s. Packard, by the way, was the first car to have a V12 in it, and that was 1915. But the series we're going to show the public for those 3 days in May, the 27th, 28th, 29th, are the true classic era Packards, the heyday of Packard. We've got our car show. It was normally in June. We've had to move it to September. That's the second, I believe that's the second or Sunday of September. And then on the third Sunday of October, we have our annual open house. We're a 501c3, we're a tax-exempt entity, and for the neighbors, we'd like to show our place off, and it's free entrance. We'll have driving tours, a chance to ride in a Packard. We have a Packard taxi stand, and we run a 1925 sedan and our 1947 sedan, and you can get a ride in a Packard. And that's free admission. We always like donations, but if you shop at our gift shop and our little bake sale table, we appreciate that too. But here's the calling of the Packards for the 12s that will be here in May. And we're here to just honor the heritage of Packard, the people that work here, the people that designed the automobiles, the people that engineered these cars, and was part of the great American story of Detroit and of the arsenal of democracy. Going to give you a little side light. I'm going to shift gears here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Packard plant. We are entirely different, by the way. The Packard Motor Car Foundation is entirely different than the entity that was trying to restore the Packard plant and failed. It's at East Grand Boulevard. At one time, it was 3.5 million square feet of manufacturing facility and was left to Mother Nature and the elements about 20 years ago, and the Vandals and the Visigoths came in and destroyed and tore the place apart, scrapped buildings out from underneath themselves by cutting apart steel beams for scrap and selling that, and a lot of buildings just imploded. Yet there was a play by a Spaniard that wanted to restore the property. He bought it for $460,000 in back taxes, in back taxes, and failed. Never could redevelop it, and lost it to a tax foreclosure sale. And the city has decided to take it down, and of that 3.5 million square feet, this is what now exists. The main administration building and part of a manufacturing building across the street from it. And the neighborhood is pretty much desolate around it at this point in time. This is one of the reasons we're so glad that we came out here to have I think, a property that tells a much niftier story. More things, in my mind, happened here of historic value than down on East Grand Boulevard. And we've got a lovely, now 17-acre site where we can have car shows on green grass instead of hot asphalt in the summertime. So, as we conclude things, I'm going to show, this is an image from 1933 of a 5-passenger sedan heading around the High Bank corners, just entering the High Bank corner, with our timing stand in the background, which still exists. And I'm going to ask you to have a safe drive home.